Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Whether you're watching a video or listening to a podcast, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. Links to videos or MP3 files can be found on MiamiGhostChronicles.com. Go to MarlenePardo.com for information on new book releases. I narrate several podcast series that can be found on major podcast platforms and can also be listened to via Alexa, Sonos, and other home systems. Look for Supernatural Storytime for scary storytelling, Nightshade Diary for classic horror and adventure stories, Stories of the Supernatural for interviews with different guests on the show. If you want to get noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, just visit Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at MiamiGhostChronicles.com or find us on Blogspot. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful.
Hi everybody, this is Marlene with Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing? Good? For my video people, my video audience, you're going to be very happy with me because I have a great video to show you, and I'm going to edit it out for the podcast version, but I wanted to let you guys see what happened when I introduced a new rooster to the flock on the property. Watch this. Oh, and by the way, what my pack of dogs thought about it.
Okay, Stripey, it's not real, Mama. It's okay. It's not real. Look, see? It's not real. It's not real. Come on, Stripey girl. It's okay. It's okay, you guys. Look, 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 look. It's not real. All right. Okay, you guys. Okay, Dottie, you check it out. Anybody else want to check out the new addition to the flock? Oh, you think you're catching on. It's not a real chicken, Stripey girl. Hey, Bubba. Come on, Bubba. What do you think of the new addition? Huh? Huh, Bubba? Come on. No? How about you, Onyx? Huh? Okay, all right. I think you guys figured out it's not real. You don't care anymore.
Okay, see? That's the new addition. I got a stone rooster. And you know what? I've got plenty of roosters running around, and my dogs were like, man, that thing is really still. They hadn't noticed, and when they noticed, they went, shoo. But now they ignore it. They realized it's made of stone. But yeah, I love to wig my dogs out every once in a while with stuff like that. Anyway, this is from those of you who've asked me for chicken videos. Well, there's my chicken video. All right. Oh, and a follow-up, because the last time I spoke, I told you about my renegade chicken that had gone under one of my sheds, and she's on eggs. And you know what? I threw up my hands. I had another one. I have right now three. I have three broody hens on eggs. And you know what? I did it before I realized it. I want to tell you why. And then we'll get into the paranormal stuff. You know why? The other day, I went to a local feed supply store, and I'm not going to say which one. Last year, I bought 6 Rhode Island Reds for $2.99, something like that, $2.40, very inexpensively. They just brought in chicks, different breeds. The cheapest, the least expensive were like $6, $9 per chick. It was like, what happened? In the space of a year, they've tripled in price. So guess what? I'm going to hatch my own. Even though I have a barnyard mix, I have so yeah, that's what's happening in Marlene's Chicken Kingdom. Now, let's get on to the good part. The good part is who I have as a guest today. This gentleman, this is the first time he's been on Stories of the Supernatural. His name is John Milor. He's an author of several books with outstanding reviews from Kirkus, Goodreads, U.S. Review of Books, Pacific Book Reviews, and Reader's Favorite. He writes in a number of different genres to include his unique brand of Christian ufology, but also children's literature, sci fi fantasy, sci fi comedy, biographies, and poetry. He is a radio talk show guest for numerous programs such as Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie, The Art Bell Show, which I love, Art Bell. May he rest in peace. The X Zone TV radio show with Rob McConnell, Jeff Rentz, and many others. Aside from writing, he is a chief master sergeant in the Air National Guard, serving as the chief of cyber operations for the United States Western Air Defense Sector. Um, Myler is a family man and has a wide variety of interests ranging from myriad outdoor activities, sports, camping, fishing, canoeing, dirt bike, etc., to playing the drums, cybersecurity, and ethical hacking. Oh, we got to ask him about that. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, John?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on your show.
No, on the contrary, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess you could say I'm an oddball. I don't really fit
I was
in.
going to ask you, I mean, it sounds like, did you get into this field? I mean, it looks like what this was your career, and then how did you go into ufology and all the rest of it? How did that come about?
Um, so I suppose you could say some people fed into me early on. Um, my great grandmother. So she's the one that connects the Christian piece because my great grandfather was an evangelist, and they traveled throughout the Great Depression all over the United States preaching the gospel and on fire for God and totally, she read the Bible 27 times, pretty much had them
Great.
memorized. Um, Yet she has a memory that she told the family when she was five. When I was 5 years old, I remember it clear as day. Um, she was reading a newspaper one day, and then like suddenly her eyes lit up, and the whole family was there. So she's like, "Listen, I have an announcement to make." So everybody's like, "Okay." The matriarch of our family is speaking. Everybody's quiet, like it's an
I
E.F. Hutton
bet.
moment.
Yes.
And she starts to read this article about a UFO chase in the countryside of Madeira. It basically was the scene of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. If you've seen the
Okay.
movie where the cops chasing the UFO
Yes,
around,
yes,
this
yes.
happened in Madeira. So
Wow.
I actually searched around for newspaper articles to try to find it, but I couldn't find it. But
Okay.
her account, from my memory, mimicked exactly that. Uh, but this occurred in Madeira, and cops were chasing these orbs of light around the country. So she read this account, and she dropped the paper on her lap, and she said, "When I was a young girl, I saw a UFO." And that was the last thing that anybody would expect to hear out of
I
grandma. I mean,
bet.
visitation from Jesus, which she actually had. That's more in line. You're thinking, angelic encounters, things like this, but UFO.
Uh, so
Uh,
I bet everybody stayed quiet after that announcement, right?
yeah, so she proceeded to talk about it that her and her sister, who died when she was a kid, were out in the plains of Kentucky before they had ever seen a motorized vehicle, because they were out in the sticks.
Hmm.
They saw this cigar-shaped, aluminum-colored craft flying through the air. No wings, no sense of propulsion, just cruising along. And she said it looked like a cigar-shaped thing about 30 feet off the ground, had a bubble on top, and they could even see the guy inside. It was so close. And it flew right in front of them, and they just looked at it, were like trying to process what are we looking at?
Hmm.
And it reached these bluffs where there was some cliffs, and it went right over them. And then she said it just shot up in the sky and disappeared in the blink of an eye and made a strange zing type sound. She even made the sound effect for it. And then she said that she and her sister were like talking all about it, like, what in the world was that? They went home and they told their mother,
Right.
who was very, very talking Bible Belt. Um,
Right. So
I mean,
the
the home she was raised in, she brought home a deck of cards once to play a game of cards with her sister, and her mother saw those cards and grabbed them and threw them in the oven and burnt them,
okay.
and told them never to ever bring a deck of cards into the house again. Those are from the devil.
Okay.
So
Pretty strict then.
very, very strict, very on fire for God home that she was raised in, and they told her what they saw. She told them to never tell another word to anybody ever again about that story. Period. And so they were thinking, well, that's a strange response, but okay. So they did what they were told, and then her sister died in her teens. So she held on to this
Yeah, because
for
this was the
what?
only other witness to that event,
The
right?
only other person she could share that with and talk about it with.
Hmm.
So now here she is in her late 70s reading this article in the newspaper. And whenever the TV was on in that house, they watched the gospel, televangelists. They listened to gospel music. They went to church. Everything in their life revolved around God and the church and Christianity. So they weren't exposed to like pop culture things, comic
Okay.
books, So I guess reading this newspaper was the first sign of like, oh, this looks very familiar.
Exactly.
And so it just like a light bulb turned on, and like she had an epiphany. And so she felt compelled to tell us all this. And then at the conclusion of all that, she said, I don't care what people think, those things are real.
Right.
So at 5 years old, I heard her, and she was the most trustworthy person that I knew, uh, make this declaration. So I just assumed from watching Star Trek, we were Trekkies in our
Hmm.
family, there's a reality there.
Sure.
And, I'm only at 5 years old, and I'm just like connecting these dots. Like it makes sense. Cosmos is way too vast to be just a bunch of rocks out there, rocks and gas and no life. And
Hmm.
besides, the Bible even tells us that there's angels, which are intelligent beings that are not from Earth. And it also uses other words like creatures and hosts and stars of heaven and different words like that refer to intelligent life that are not native to Earth. So I wasn't putting all of this together and connecting all of these dots. I just simply accepted it. And my grandmother never bothered to reconcile her faith with
Right. It
this
was.
understanding.
Yeah.
It
Her
was
eyes
just
wouldn't lie
something,
to her, though. That's the thing.
right. Um, but I could tell you that later in life, so I didn't have an epiphany with God myself until I was like 21. Um, but when I turned 21 and I had this God encounter and became a Christian, Jesus came to me in a vision when I was asleep.
Okay.
So I'd been to church before and heard all altar calls and all those things, and I would have said that I was a Christian, but I was just very open to lots of things. Didn't connect it with. I mean, I believed in evolution and just all kinds of stuff, right?
Okay.
Until I had this encounter, and after this encounter, I woke up just believing like, okay, Jesus is real. He's alive. He actually visits people personally.
Okay.
Um, so this is a reality I have to contend with, but there's this other reality over here that I also know is real. And I know that these two realities, um, by the time I was 21, were conflicting. Uh, Christians typically took everything new agey, paranormal, whatever, and just
Hmm.
lumped it with together and stamped it demonic and threw it
Right.
out the window. And I'm not ready to do that. I'm
Okay.
too much of a critical thinker. I had some science under my belt at that time. Um, I have 5 degrees. I have two
Okay.
master degrees. So, with all of this thinking and my background in these two different worldviews that tended to clash a lot, I felt compelled to reconcile these out and really dig into the Bible, but also look at it from a scientific side and make sense out of these things. And it sort of set me on this path early on. So that's sort of the academic side of it. But then my life is a paranormal compendium, of all these experiences that I've had. And I think anybody, I'm sure that you've had plenty of encounters yourself, because
Oh,
that's
sure.
what happens. You're open to it. You know that it's real. You know there's more than meets the eye to this reality. Simply knowing that and accepting it and believing it,
Hmm.
you don't just dismiss things.
Of
You
course.
hear a
It's
noise.
it's one thing doesn't exclude the other. You can believe in the scientific method or
Hmm.
in, measuring things. I get that, but some people think, like you said, it's either one or the other. You
Yeah,
know, it's
black and
either
white.
woo or science, and it's like, okay, they can overlap. Like the Venn diagram. There's a
Hmm.
common meeting area between,
Exactly.
between both.
Hmm. Or Johari window.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's funny because a lot of people think in black and white terms,
Hmm.
when in fact reality is like 90% gray.
Sure.
So, or they have Occam's razor that they use to explain, but if Occam ever encountered something he'd never seen before and he had no frame of reference to describe it,
Exactly.
then Occam is lost, and
Yeah.
he's prone to simply dismiss something altogether.
Right.
It's even
I don't get it,
psychology.
so it doesn't. It's like, all
It
right,
doesn't exist.
right, which
Yeah.
doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just.
Yeah. I even read in the psychology book that when the Native Americans first encountered Spaniards riding on horses, or they saw the ships were first coming out from sea,
Hmm.
that a lot of them were able to just like look at it and just filter it out. It would almost
Right.
be like looking at a flat ocean with nothing on it,
Right. Right.
because they didn't know what it was, and the brain will just literally filter things out.
It will. It will.
And
It
when they
will.
saw Spaniards riding on horses, they thought it was one creature,
Ah,
until they dismounted, and then it's just their world was turned upside down.
sure.
So this is what people encounter when they're faced with something that they don't understand. They don't know how to explain it. So a lot of the times the brain just shuts it off, But I've never been that way. That switch is gone in me.
Right.
So
All right.
since
I
a
think
young
that
age,
most of us, hopefully, even if at the first flush you kind of back away and go, oh, especially if it's something really startling and that kind of tilts your world view to the
Hmm.
side. Hopefully, most people, you kind of like rethink it and you go, wait a minute. And that's happened to me where you witness something that you're like, man, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And it's kind of scary because we
Uh-huh.
always want everything to make sense in our world. Whatever our
Yeah.
world is, your perception is your reality. And then that's when you go through that mental checklist that you're talking about. Like, if it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. So what's left?
Yeah.
Even if you
Exactly.
don't know how to identify it per se at that moment, hopefully
Hmm.
that's what most people do. But I know what you're talking about, that there's people that it's like, forget it. That doesn't exist. I can't handle that in my world.
Yeah. And I see the place I find myself frequently is being in a, sort of standing on the outside of the in group, because
Hmm.
with Christians, they tend to dismiss um, a lot of the things that a scientist will get,
Sure.
but the scientist will dismiss a lot of the things that the spirit side gets. So I try to put those together, like, look, they can both be true. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. So I just wanted to point this one out right here. This is
Sure.
called The Paranormal Christian.
Okay.
This is a freebie on my website that anybody that emails me,
Hmm.
I'll send them the PDF for this book
What is
for
your
free.
email address? So for my podcast listeners.
jmilor@yahoo.com.
Okay.
That's JMILOR.
Okay. I'll put it in the
I
credits of the show, but I want my podcast listeners to have
Okay,
it. Okay.
but I have a website, johnmilor.com.
Okay. All right.
That's one of them. I also have other websites, aliensinthebible.com. That might be easier to remember. Um,
Okay.
so one of my first books that I wrote, um, I wasn't planning on it, but I went on a business trip in the military, and when I was sitting in my hotel room, um, ruminating on all of these things, and I started compiling these notes. And so I decided, well, I'm going to go on a TDY. Maybe I should just kind of put these notes together, and just to try to sort it and organize it and make sense out of it. Um, and in 17 hours nonstop over a weekend, I wrote half of this. And
Whoa.
it just came out. And so I decided, you know what? This isn't an article. This is a
A
book.
book? Yeah.
So I put like another 2 weeks into it, and then I finished this. So this is Aliens in the Bible, and it's one of the first ones I came out with.
Okay.
And I mentioned this one, which was published back in 2000, no, maybe 1999. It was a while back.
Time flies when you're
Um,
having fun, huh?
Nobody was writing about Nephilim back then.
Yes, you're right.
So I was one of the pioneers, I say, in Christian ufology because it didn't really exist. There were some people here and there that touched on it, but didn't specialize in it. Um, and I pulled out all of their stuff and included it in here. But this was my first book, and this book actually covers a wide gambit of things. I talk about ghosts. I talk about so that the subtitle kind of explains it. It's a biblical perspective of supernatural entities, realms of existence, and phenomenon. So it's divided into three sections,
Okay.
and I kind of explain um, when in the phenomenon part, I cover ghosts and thought forms and all this stuff. So, like I said, my great grandmother kind of got me interested in
And you know what? You're
extraterrestrial.
absolutely correct, John, because I remember, because when you're a little bit older, you remember clearly these things.
Hmm.
Back in, right before, that Y2K moment that everybody thought things were gonna. I remember, like you said, UFOs usually you would hear it was like Roswell, the typical UFO
Hmm.
things. That was the extent of it. Those were the things that were publicized or talked about as far as UFOs, but that was it. There was
It was
no
pretty light.
Christian angle to it whatsoever. It was like those two
The
things were
closest, yeah, the closest they had was Chariots of the
right.
Gods with Eric von Daniken,
Hmm.
but he's not really a Christian. He kind of went this other way with it and said basically Christians are mistaken. They encountered extraterrestrials and they mistook them for being God. Um,
Okay.
I haven't been able to actually interview him, but if I suspect if you asked him, did the God of the Bible create the universe and all life within it? He would probably say, no, I don't think so. Um, because I don't know if he believes that God as defined in the Bible. So that's where I would define myself, distinguish myself from an ancient astronaut theorist because I am a Christian. I believe in the creation story in the Bible, but it is more complicated than most
Sure.
Christians. I do believe the old Earth theory, for example. I think this planet probably is 5 billion years old,
Right.
but I don't believe in evolution. And a lot of people have a hard time figuring that out, including myself. When I wrote
Hmm.
this, I didn't know that yet, but I kept
Right.
researching even after I wrote it. And then I came out with this one, Aliens and the Antichrist. That was the sequel
Wow.
where, I kept doing interviews with people and finding out more and more things. Um, One of the best ways to halt an alien abduction, for example, is to call in the name of Jesus. And they usually get out of there.
You know what? And let's stop right there because I've discussed this other times because everybody thinks as because what you're telling me is that in essence an alien, let's use the word alien as in what most people think of as an extraterrestrial, is subject to basically how can I be what am I thinking? Be stopped with using the name of Jesus. Most people would think, what does that have to do with it? If it's an extraterrestrial, why would they react?
Why? Yes. The reason is,
And
yeah, God is the God of creation. He created them. He created us. He created everything. Why wouldn't it work?
let me ask, do you think, because I've heard this theory also, that there is an overlap between demons and extraterrestrials?
I talk all about that in this book, and actually my latest one, which is the second edition of Aliens and the Antichrist, is this one,
Mm-hmm.
Christian Ufology.
Okay.
And this is on christianufology.com, or no, .net, christianufology.net. Um, so the Bible explains the origin of demons um, indirectly. Uh, in the past, dating back to Genesis 6, beings from other worlds came here. We call them angels. That's the Bible's word for it.
Mm-hmm.
Watchers is another word. There are certain species of angel that are humanoid. They mated with humans. They had children. Their children, they also crossed with animals too. So it's a weird, convoluted story. How
Okay.
they crossed? Did they genetic experiment with it? Did they
Okay.
actually shapeshift into an animal and then mate with animals? Who knows the backstory to it? But we do
Right.
know that there were these half breed, part animal, part angel creatures and half breed human angels. They generally have supernatural power. So, this activity in Genesis chapter 6 is the spawn of all of these different mythologies of creatures that have powers. You see it in all the mythologies. Baal is
Mm-hmm.
the, what do you call it, the Minotaur,
Right.
bull-headed man body creature.
Yes, exactly.
And there probably really was a Minotaur creatures, and they probably had power, like supernatural power. Some of these creatures are even able to like disappear or maybe teleport. They might be transdimensional in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Bigfoot might be one of these creatures.
Right, right.
So
Yes.
he can like disappear right in front of you. And hence,
Yes.
he's very stealthful, but
Right.
can also become very physical and then like disappear again. So that's one of the theories about Bigfoot. Um, but it's also why people have experiences that have had experiences with demons, describe them as creatures like with horns and all of that. These creatures once existed and then they died physically. The
Okay.
angels that spawned them are immortal, but their children were half breeds, so they were like mortal, but they lived like 500 years old,
Okay.
according to the book of Enoch. So they died, and their spirits became what we now know as demons.
Okay.
So demons are usually non-corporeal. They're the ghosts of
Okay.
Nephilim.
All
So
right.
that's where they come from. But God's creation isn't, I don't believe it's just earth. I believe the heaven is the heavens. The actual word in the Bible that is used most for heaven is a plural word,
All
and
right.
it refers to the second heaven. In Hebrew, it's shamayim, and it refers to the heavens. So if you think of both this planet and all of the planets in our cosmos as a multidimensional construct, you go to a lower dimension, you still have a universe, you still have planets. It's just at a different frequency or whatever, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
integrated, overlapped. Even
Okay.
Earth is multidimensional, even as described by the Bible. The dimension of hell, there are multiple dimensions of hell, and they're like within the Earth. It's like layers of lithospheres,
Okay.
layers of existence, and they kind of bleed over into each other sometimes.
Okay.
So what you see as a ghost could be many, many different things. It could be people actually from another dimension that are just living normal lives. We don't know.
Right.
It could also be a disincarnate spirit.
Okay.
It could also be a demon making itself look like something. There's just a lot of different things it could be.
Right. Do you think
Um,
that there's time slips where people
oh
sometimes
yeah.
either they, one comes to the other, either we go there or vice versa, or when we see
hmm
things that,
Retro recognition,
mm-hmm.
where you can walk into a room and you're looking in the 1940s.
Yes, of course.
Yes, I've read about that. Just like Star Trek is so famous for showing the physical universe is a mystery in itself, and what we understand in physics is just scratching the surface.
Sure.
They the thing is, what the Bible talks about is a multidimensional reality, and our science is getting to the point of understanding it. So if you know enough science, string theory, M theory, uh, the way that reality can be existing in multiple levels simultaneously. and they can kind of cross over each other. And then time isn't this unflexible thing that
Sure.
a lot of people think of it. You see into the past, you see into the future. Here's an interesting thing: people in the
Okay.
Bible that have God type experiences and encounters with angels and stuff have prophecies, and they tend to see into the future.
Okay.
But people that are dealing with curses, and if you go into a place that's haunted and stuff, that's a curse. They tend to see into the past.
Yes.
So there's what we call haunting echoes, that they're not necessarily interactive. You might be witnessing a murder that happened 100 years ago or whatever. They've been
Mm-hmm.
seen entire armies. And then you have phantom noises.
Right.
How's a noise a ghost? How is a train a ghost?
Right.
It can't be. You're looking into the past, you're perceiving an energy in the past because a curse does something to the atmosphere that changes the molecular structure, and certain people can perceive into the past to see those things.
I think that what it is also when you have a repetition of an event, whether it's a noise, a smell, like you said, something that's done a lot,
It
a lot, a lot.
imprints.
It imprints on
Hmm.
the fabric of that place.
Hmm.
And like you said, you'll get somebody who's sensitive or something, or sometimes it's even an anniversary, a certain time of day where, but it's like on cue all the time. And there's no intelligence. It's just like a
Hmm.
replay and a loop.
Right.
But of course, we always go by what our senses, the regular
Hmm.
senses tell us. And when we witness something that doesn't add up, that's when people get spooked.
Yeah. So the things
And
that I'm talking about here is kind of a lot of my ramblings in the book, except a little more organized because I do think from a spiritual perspective, but also scientific and analytical. I ask questions like, why do people see ghosts wearing clothing?
exactly.
Is the clothing alive? What's
Yeah,
making the clothing appear?
exactly. Right, because
So
you hear some people see ghosts like normal. You hear people saying,
mhm,
"Oh, I saw the ghost," and the person, and in some cases they even mistake it for a regular person. That's how solid it is. And then you see
right,
other people say, "Oh, I saw the ghost or the victim or whatever," all like corpsey looking, and it's like,
yeah, it's
how does
not
that
so
work?
cut and dry. So there's a lot of so I became encyclopedic about paranormal stuff because my mom saw that I just sort of had this slant to me. I'm
Okay.
always asking her these questions, like made her scratch her head, and like the ghost clothing question, and I kept doing this, and so she's like, "Well, I need to just get him some books."
Yeah,
So she went and bought an entire encyclopedia of Reader's Digest Encyclopedia of the Paranormal,
I
and
remember.
it was
God,
like
Reader's
it
Digest.
was
Yeah.
huge. It was like 24 volumes to this thing, and as soon as that book arrived in the mail, I absorbed it and
Hmm.
memorized it. I wasn't trying; it just happened.
Right.
So by the time I was like 9, 10 years old, I had an encyclopedia in my head of all
Okay.
this paranormal stuff.
Right.
And that's kind of how I went through life. And so when I saw things or experienced things, my mind would go through this index of, oh, this could be this could be that, this could be that. And so the aliens in the Bible book is kind of like me just sort of pointing out, picking an entity, for example, like a ghost, which is the
Hmm.
most generic term you can get.
Right.
There's a lot of other terms, though. Thought forms, that's a human generated entity
Yes.
that
Yes.
can be possessed by a demon or a human and commandeered for its energy. So, all kinds of interesting things that I read in those books when I was a kid. And then I'd actually talk to different people. And then my mind's thinking, like, okay, this is probably that, And so I just think we live in a fascinating universe with
Yes.
so many different things going on that I could just sit and write books about the stuff all day.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that for how can I say it? I don't yeah, things should be questioned. Absolutely, because there's a lot of things sometimes that are claimed that it's like no. But
right.
I think that the majority of us, depending on what your threshold is, everybody's got a different threshold. We want to live our lives in the normal world, as in, this is
Hmm.
what I know. And then once you accept any of these, whatever it is, whether it's Bigfoot, UFO, ghosts, whatever, angels, then I say that's when the horizon on your existence gets very fuzzy. Because if that exists, what else is possible? And
Everything.
a lot of people don't want to go there. They don't want
Yeah.
to go there.
Well, they're afraid they're going to be insane. They're
Yeah.
afraid it's going to take them too far, and they're not going to come
Yes.
back. And trust me, I've been there. Uh, but I've always had a tether to reality. I've always been able
Mm-hmm.
to, you know, put my stake in the ground, tether myself to it, and then journey off, but not get
Yes.
lost.
Sure.
I'm not afraid to ask hard ass questions
Mm-hmm.
and keep asking. And then if I don't get an answer, I'm not going to just say, well, okay, it's demonic. Why?
Right.
Because I don't understand it, so it's got to be demonic. I did Moses do that? I mean, I read the Bible and I'm like asking these questions in the Bible too. Moses came across this burning bush and it started talking to him. Almost anybody would have freaked out and ran.
For sure. It'd be like, oh,
Moses is like, I don't know what this is, but I'm curious. So he goes in, and next thing he knows, he's just having a conversation with something that's just like telling him, "Take off your sandals." Everything out of this burning bush is so enigmatic and mysterious and powerful. How could you run away from that? I just would not be able to run away from it. I,
well,
I would rather die trying to experience whatever was there, you know? And that's just me.
well, I think also, I'm going to say, let's say in the time of Moses, and people were more apt to believe in a, how can I, what's this word? I'm not thinking of miracle, but
Superstition. Yeah.
well, not even
Yeah.
superstition. They were more willing to believe this is something supernatural and it's happening and I'm going to stay here.
True.
Modern person, that happens to them. You hear a voice coming out of a burning bush, and they'd be like, they'd run, they'd run, they'd be
Hmm.
like, I'm having a bad trip. No, whatever. They would never equate the supernatural or communication from God. Nothing. Forget it. They would
And
never
over the
even go
next
there.
Yeah, and over the next week they're going to break out Occam's razor and come up with 15
Yes,
reasons to explain that
yes,
it is not supernatural. So,
yes, yes. And that's a
um,
shame. I hate to say it. In some instances, it acts against us instead of for us. That having
mhm,
that perspective on our existence.
yeah. So,
Let me
and,
ask you
and,
when because you part of your expertise is in a very analytical field, and then you go into this, which is how, is that the way you like this part, which is
it's sort
computers,
of like that.
IT, or
It's
how does that
like that
work?
with me and everything. It
Okay,
probably goes back to me being a right-brained person in a left-brained world.
okay,
Um, my natural inclination, being left-handed, is art and music. I play the drums.
mm-hmm,
I kind of understand the part of the mind that is like can't really be articulated very well.
okay,
Um, but it's experiential and emotions and all of that dominant. But from a young age, I was determined to understand and try to grapple with the right, left brain world I live in. Um, and force myself by brute force to learn, the mechanics of writing, learn all of this stuff. Uh, Computers interested in me in college. Uh, I'm interested in everything. When I went to school, I couldn't make up my mind. I changed my major like 7 times. So, that's why I got screenwriting and cybersecurity, two different
right,
majors, night and day.
yeah,
So I think it's important, and I learned this young, to try to keep both sides of that brain active and healthy. So, because of that, I've always had one foot on one side and one foot on the other side of most issues. Um, Science, theology, conservative, liberal, just everything. Now, of course, I do veer, dominant in one particular direction, but it doesn't mean that I'm ignoring the other
Right.
side. I know there's a
Right.
point there. I know that there's something to be gleaned from that. So, on the
And which
one hand,
is
yeah, I'm willing to believe all this supernatural stuff, but at the same time, I still got my checklist.
sure.
Okay, let's go through the natural stuff. Let's not
Yeah.
dismiss that maybe I did hallucinate. I have had actual full blown hallucinations due to sleep private deprivation, so I know
Sure.
about them. But at the same time, if I can go through my checklist and I know that, for example, the ball of light I communicated with in the jungle of Panama, I write about that in that book.
Okay. Wait. Stop. Stop right there. Okay. But don't just say that. Oh, by the way, I just I had an experience with a ball of light. Or
Yeah.
what happened?
So so that's not me being crazy because my
No.
checklist says, wait a minute, there was another person that was there with me. And I
Okay.
asked him about it the next day, and his only response was that I summoned it. Like, to
It was your
mock me.
fault.
To mock me. Of all the things you could
That's
say, you're
funny.
gonna mock me? Because they used to make fun of me in the army, right? I mean, I want to get ghost stories from people because I think they're
Okay.
fascinating, and I would try to figure it out. Like, what is
Right.
that? And is that a ghost? Is that maybe this or this? Um, so I got this nickname. They used to call me weirdo or something like that, and it was a stigma that stuck to me, right? And so this corporal that was my team leader just taunted me day and night, right?
Uh-huh.
And when we went to Panama during the Panamanian invasion in 1990, uh, we were stationed in the jungle, guarding the perimeter of Fort Sherman, and I was at a guard post with this corporal,
Right.
and it's getting near midnight, getting uh, eaten alive by insects, just trying to stay awake because I hadn't slept in a couple of months. That's actually where I had my full blown hallucination, right?
Okay.
So, yeah, sure, I'm wondering if I'm hallucinating, but when I wake him up and he sees it, I'm not hallucinating,
But
plus
what
I'm on guard
happened?
duty.
What happened? You were what?
Uh,
Doing guard duty?
I was on guard duty
Okay.
and I saw out in the jungle something about the size of a soccer ball, pure white light, like electricity, and it was a ball of electricity, but it was like as bright as a camera flash, and it would flash on, and then you wouldn't see anything for like 30 to 60 seconds, and then it would flash
Okay.
on again, and it was moving toward us. And I saw it like a good 300, 400 yards away. And at first, I thought it was the lightning that had been going on. In Panama, they had sheet lightning,
Uh-huh.
which just kind of blankets the sky. And it's not like regular lightning where you see streaks or whatever. It's just like somebody's got a big lamp up there and it's flickering on and off, right?
Okay.
And in the haze, because there's a lot of like so humid there, it was just like a lot of haze in the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought at first that it was that, and I was just filtering it out. But finally, it occurred to me that there was some flashing that was going on at a much lower altitude, and it was brighter. And this became apparent the closer it got. And when it was about 400 feet away, that's when it really got or 400 yards away, that's when it got my attention to just like, I couldn't see what it was. I just knew there was light coming from the jungle. It was about 20 feet, 30 feet up in the air in the tree line. And it came straight to my position, like a beeline, just boom.
Oh boy.
And I'm just like watching this thing, like, what is that? And the closer it got, the more mysterious it became, like this ball of light that was intermittently flashing. And I'm like, is it ball lightning? No. Ball lightning stays on and it zips around erratically until it hits something and diffuses. Swamp gas, usually it's kind of greenish and it's just like a cloudy haze that sort of moves around. It's not either of those. So this leaves me very limited options. And I'm like going through my index and I'm not finding anything in my index. What is this? And so I wake up Corporal Stinger, who was sound asleep, and I said, It's your time for the shift. Mine's over. There's some other worldly thing flashing on and off over here, but I'm going to go to sleep because I'm tired. Good night." And he's like, wait a minute. And he wouldn't let me go to sleep, and he's
I
questioning
bet.
me. But then he thinks, "Oh, you're just screwing with me, blah, blah, blah," right? And he started laughing. But then while he's laughing, it flashed. And I said, "I wasn't kidding. That was it." And so he's like looking and like transfixed. And I said, "You got to wait about 30 seconds to a minute or so because it'll flash again, and it's coming over here." So now he was like on edge. And then when it flashed again, he was freaked out. And this thing came straight to our position and stopped. And it kept flashing in the same spot. And I said, "If I didn't know better, I'd say that thing's checking us out." And
Boy.
he's like, he's not saying anything. He's just silent. And I said, "I'm going to communicate with it." And he was like, "No, the hell you are." And I'm
I was
like,
gonna say, I don't think he was probably on board with that.
"Oh no, he wasn't." But I was already walking out to the center of a clearing, and he's like, "Get the F back here." Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, "Dude, if it wanted to kill us, it could have already. Look at the energy that thing's generating." So I'm trying to talk some sense into him. And I'm like, "Don't you understand? We have an opportunity. This is like every Star Trek episode fan's dream, right?
Right.
I get to introduce myself to a unknown species." And he's just like staring at me, drool coming out of it. It's just
He
like
must.
he's not processing at this point. He's just like shut off. And so I walk out there and I introduce myself. I said, "Look, I mean you no harm, plain James T. Kirk, right?
Yeah.
And I come in peace. If you don't mind, could you please reveal yourself? Let me know who you are, what your intentions are." So, but in my mind, I already did an inventory. I had an M60 with 750 rounds
Okay.
that I was wearing at first. But then I thought, if this is ball lightning or any kind of lightning atmospheric phenomenon, I'm screwed because that thing's going to come and zap me because it's going to be attracted to all this metal, and then it
Uh
might even
huh.
blow up because of all these ammunition rounds. So I take my weapon off, and I also had a radio with a bunch of lithium batteries and a 6-foot antenna that's nothing short of a lightning rod. And I'm like, I might want to put this over here,
Just in
but it, it
case.
it never went for any of those things. So I'm thinking more in my mind, this is intelligent. Whatever this is, it's acting intelligent, and I want to communicate with it. So I went out and I introduced myself, and I'm not hearing anything, and I'm like, what's going to happen? Suddenly I had this feeling come over me, and I couldn't see it. So it would flash and I'd see it. But while I'm not seeing it, suddenly I felt it moving. And that's
Okay.
the weird part. I don't know how it relayed to me where it was at. It relayed to me that it was moving, and I could feel its presence coming straight at me.
Oh.
And it was powerful, overwhelming. So take that feeling of being watched.
Okay.
That feeling if you're in a kind of a creepy place because
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you're being watched,
Yes.
amplify it by 1,000, and something's coming at you. I could feel it, and I kind of backed up a little bit, but I held my ground, and I'm like, "Oh, please don't kill me." I
Right.
felt it fly right over my head, and I'm telling Corporal Stinger, I'm like, "I feel it moving, and I don't know how I feel it moving, but I feel it moving." And I had AMPVS 7 night vision goggles on, and I put them
Okay.
up, and I'm looking, right? I'm not seeing it even with night vision goggles, right? And I told them, the next time this thing flashes, it's going to flash right about. I did a complete 180 with these goggles, and I'm facing behind me, and I point up in the tree, and I say, "Right there." And when I say the word there and point, it flashed right where I pointed.
Oh.
And I have no idea how it put that information in me. So it didn't talk to me. It didn't use English, any known
Right.
communication that I know of, but it
Mm-hmm.
relayed to me where it was. It relayed to me that I believe it was a sentient entity. It was alive. It was curious about us, and it was letting us know, I acknowledge you, and here I am.
Okay.
And it never like morphed or changed shape or turned into anything else.
Okay.
Instead, it did a complete circle around our perimeter like a probe, like it's analyzing
Mm-hmm.
every side.
Okay.
And I'm just watching it, and it did a complete circle around our perimeter. And I'm still expecting it to maybe do something, but it never did. Instead, it went down this trail and it went to the other two positions that were posted out there, and it did a
Really?
circle around those two positions, and then it went back off into the jungle. Almost like some curious thing that just showed up, kind of like, what are you up to? What are you doing here? All right, I'm going to go over here. What are you doing? And then off it went. So
Do you think it could have been something biomechanical that was sent out to, like you said, scout or reconnoiter or something? Or was it,
could have been. It
okay.
was a war we were in, and wars tend to attract things like this.
Okay, right. Yes, I've heard of that.
Uh,
I've heard
so
of that.
I, I was also an avid Dungeons and Dragons fan. I became
Mm-hmm.
a dungeon master, and I memorized some of the books. And uh, it had the appearance and behavior of a will o' the wisp.
Okay.
So I mean, I read that, and they actually have one of those in the that cartoon Brave, where you had
Mm-hmm.
that little light that's flashing, and the
Yes.
girl follows it.
Yes.
And according to lore, those try to provoke your curiosity to get you to follow them. And then if
Right,
you
and get
follow
lost
them,
in
you
the woods.
fall in
Yeah.
a snake pit or something bad like
Right.
that. And I wasn't going anywhere. I was on my post. I was definitely curious. I do think it was powerful enough to kill me, but
So what about that poor corporal? That-
so yeah, this guy was just like white as a ghost. And I'm like just on and on telling him, what we just saw, that doesn't exist in any biology textbook anywhere, but you might see it on an episode of Star Trek. And he was just like, he just wasn't talking. He was shut down. So,
no wonder he blamed you for that afterwards.
so the next day I brought it up again. I said, what happened last night wasn't a dream, right? Nod your head. And he's like, oh, shut the F up. He's like,
Okay.
you summoned that. And I'm like,
Right.
summoned it. And then he started joking. So I asked the guys at the other two positions, and they told me, yeah, we saw something kind of weird. Don't know what that was. But nobody really wanted to talk about it.
Of
And
course
I'm
not.
like, aren't you curious? I mean, that doesn't exist. Reality has not identified this. No one has seen this. It's not in any book anywhere. So that's where I got this whole idea of transdimensional species.
Okay.
And this was before I had my God encounter. I was 20 years old or 19 years old when that happened.
Okay.
So when I got out of the Army after 3 years, and that's when I had, it was kind of a dark time in my life. And I was probably as far away from God as I ever was. And right when I turned 21, is kind of like God came in and kind of gave me a warning, said, you reach the age of accountability. You can't keep doing what you're doing and get
Mm-hmm.
away with it anymore. I'm not going to protect you anymore like I have been. Uh, your umbrella of protection is
Right.
going to recede unless you change some of your behavior. So the gist of my dream that I had, which I wrote in another book, um, of that vision with God, is where he was like showing me these things in a dream, and he was invisible. I couldn't see him.
Okay.
And then when I woke up, I asked, who was that? I'm rehearsing the dream in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I actually audibly heard Jesus say his name in my ear, like his
Wow.
mouth is right up against my ear, and he said, Jesus.
It's like, okay,
And
there you go.
these chills shot down my body. I was not expecting a response when I asked the
Mm-hmm.
question. I was just pondering, like, who was that invisible person in my dream?
Right.
Jesus. And it floored me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I changed. And then I returned to that memory of, I've always had this supernatural thing about me, where a friend of mine told me, hang around John long enough, you'll see a ghost. Hang around him long enough, something weird is going to happen, and you're not going to have an explanation for it. And that was just the rule of thumb with me.
Okay.
But after my God encounter, then I started looking at things through a biblical lens.
Okay.
Day one after that encounter, I was like, what does a Christian do? I don't even know. What does a Christian do? Maybe read the Bible? So I picked up a Bible. I started reading Genesis chapter 1. I'm like pausing every 5 seconds or like just to think about it. But when I
Hmm.
got to Genesis 6, just 6 chapters into the Bible, like page 2, I'm seeing something that's like, wait a minute, I know what this is. And I've
Okay.
never heard any Christian say anything even remotely close to what's swimming in my head. So that's where all of this writing and stuff came from. My mind
Okay.
just like exploded. All those years of paranormal research and stuff started
Okay.
connecting all at once. My brain, if I was under a brain scan, probably would have just been on fire. Um,
Right.
and I proceeded to read the Bible from cover to cover, just
Hmm.
absorbing, and I couldn't help but write down all these notes like, I think I know what this is. And the Bible's the most paranormal book I know. And I
And
never,
and a lot of people want to paint it as the total opposite. Like, no.
yeah, no, no. Well, their lens is,
Right.
they put a fairy tale lens on it. It's like sci-fi versus fantasy. Yes,
Yes.
it's both. You don't have to take this metaphor and just package it up and set it aside over here apart from reality. Your reality
Right.
is integrated. It's all together. When you actually walk outside at night and you look up at the sky, you're looking at heaven, the
Sure.
literal heaven. And I kind of always subconsciously knew these things, but after my vision, my encounter with Jesus, it just really came to life, just exploded in me. And I've been on that journey ever since. And
Right.
almost like dragged into it because I don't really have much of a choice. I see things the way I see them.
Sure.
And
And you know what? That's really one of the things. That saying, very to thine own self be true.
hmm
You are the way you are, and like you said, there's a lot of gray in life because if you're too rigid, forget it. You're going to be a very unhappy person,
hmm
whether it's how you do it or what you believe or how you think. If you're too rigid, forget it. You're bound to be a pain
and
in
you're
the neck
missing
to those
out.
around you. Oh, of course you
Yeah.
do, of course you do. As a matter of fact, it was really interesting when you say the dichotomy. The other day, I had missed this because this came out at the end of last year. You remember that movie, The Exorcist, that came out in the 70s? That supposedly it
Yeah.
was based on an exorcism that they did back in the 40s, the Jesuits, right?
hmm
Turns out, I was like, when I read this, I was like, this is incredible. Turns out by the time that William Peter Blatty, wrote the novel, because he based it on an article that came out in 1949 about this John Doe, because of course he was a teenager and they wouldn't say, give his name, and that the Jesuits. So that's what inspired him to write the book and then the film. When all this is going on, would you believe that that boy grew up and worked for NASA as an engineer for 40 years?
It makes sense.
I was
Yeah.
like, holy God. Is what you think? Well, you know what? This poor kid, whether it was true or not, I mean, God, talk about something messing with your head.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I saw the movie, but I also saw a documentary and I read up on it.
Right.
The grand finale. So Hollywood has a tendency to just really spice things up.
Yes, it does. Of course.
So I'm sure it was scary as all get out for the priests and the other people that were there to see this kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
and demons can make your body do things that are not physically possible, like
Right.
squish your head through holes that are like, how? Like,
Right.
I think that it can even adjust your molecular structure to some extent
Sure.
to force your head to squish through a hole that's too small to
Right.
do that. It's extremely powerful. What a demon can do to the body when it integrates into it fully. But I read that story and I did some research on it, and the great grand finale was the kid busting free of his restraints and ripping a spring out of the bed
Hmm.
and slashing the priest with it and hurting him. He didn't kill anybody. He hurt the
No.
priest pretty bad, but he still got the demon cast out. you know.
Well, you know what?
The real story is
If
somewhat anticlimactic, you know. So that Hollywood's like, well, we can't do anything with that. We got to, really spice it up, you know.
well, the thing is this: when you look at it, there were four priests involved. There was a main one, which
Hmm.
is the one that the. But in reality, there was four, and they did this for like a few months, a couple of months,
Yeah.
and they were, one of them actually wrote a diary, which, by the way, was really weird because I'll tell you in a minute. They sealed it off, and it was. But anyway,
Uh
one
huh.
of them, I think it was Halloran. He says, no, was it Halloran? One of them says something like, "Yeah, the kid hit me, but it was not with superhuman strength. It was like." And that, yeah, he would go into these fits of like if they were ever trying to do a prayer over him, he would start the convulsions, but never, no vomiting, no, none, none of the stuff that they did in Hollywood.
Yeah.
All right, and things of this nature, and that yeah, sometimes I had to restrain him, and in other words, he would go through periods where he was a 14-year-old,
Hmm.
and then he would go through periods where, especially when they were having to do any recital of prayers, where he would like wig out, but never, not of course to what you see in the movie. Like you said, of
Yeah.
course they went to the nth degree, but then of course, and it's really funny because at the time that this movie was released, he was already working as an engineer at NASA, and they were one of the person that he died in his 80s in 2020. He passed away in 2020.
Hmm.
He said, the person said, it was a woman, said that he lived his entire life worried that he would be exposed, that he was the so-called haunted boy of
Hmm.
that, of the story,
Oh,
the news article.
yeah. There would be a stigma about it. Yeah.
Well, can you imagine you're an engineer at NASA and it comes out
Hmm.
that you were the kid that. But see, when this article was written back in 1949, okay, back then it was scary, but of course no, they didn't give out his name. What propelled
Hmm.
it into notoriety was when the movie came, when the book and the movie came out.
Hmm.
And of course, remember, the whole thing that scared was it was based on a true story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he spent
Yeah.
the most they were saying that even though obviously he worked 40 years for NASA, and he
Hmm.
patented some type of what you call it, technology to protect the shuttles from the heat. This kid was, or he grew up to a man that was no dummy, by
Yeah.
long far from it. But he spent his whole life, and technically in a way, being overshadowed or haunted by what happened.
Hmm.
Not so much the demonic part, but like you said, the stigma.
I get it. I mean, I was. I'm retired now. I just retired in December, but I was chief of cyber operations.
Congratulations.
So yeah, this kind of followed me, and I know that there was like, hushed talking, and oh, he's
Hmm.
eccentric. That's the word they use for totally insane, but
Yeah.
kind of smart maybe, and somewhat successful. So we can't call him crazy. He's
Yeah.
functional. He's functional insane.
He's just
So
eccentric, peculiar at times.
yeah, but hey, you've seen enough stuff like that. Okay, anybody be insane by that definition. They've seen what I've seen. I've performed an exorcism before, so I'd
Oh,
seen some of the stuff
what
that they
happened?
show in it.
Can you talk about that?
Somewhat. Um,
I mean, I don't want you to disclose names, obviously. I understand about,
Believe it or not, I performed it over the phone.
okay, at a distance, okay.
The person that I was talking to suddenly, I noticed whenever I talked about God stuff, the person's would get agitated and upset, and like not in a normal way, and the voice would deepen.
Ooh,
And at one point, I just kept talking, and then I said something that was a trigger for this thing. Uh,
okay,
this person actually got physically healed in a very dramatic way.
okay,
Like scars disappeared.
okay.
And that was when I was talking to the person. The person was attacked by someone and put in a hospital, came out of the hospital and was recovering and called me and was talking about this horrible experience. And then I said at one point, uh, do you still believe in God after all of this stuff has happened to you? And then the person said, yes. And I said, you know what? I think God is going to totally bless you, and you're just going to experience a healing over that. I wasn't expecting the person to get healed.
Right.
But the person's talking to me on the phone, and they walked into the restroom and looked in the mirror and screamed
Okay.
because all the cuts and stitches and everything were gone.
Okay.
And the
And you were
person
like, okay, this
picked
is
up the phone and is telling me about this, and I'm like processing it, wondering, okay, is this person out to lunch, or what's going on here?
okay.
And I said, you know what, that's awesome. And then the person started telling me, you know what, I wonder if this is what happened to me when I was a kid. And I said, well, what happened? And apparently, when this person was a little kid, a toddler,
Hmm.
there was a couple of things that happened that baffled everyone.
Okay.
Fell down this huge flight of stairs, and everybody thought the person was dead. Got
Hmm.
up like nothing, right?
Okay.
On another occasion, um, when this person was taken to a priest to get baptized, red light shot out of the person's eyes.
As a
And
child.
yes, as a child. And the priest was kind of freaked out, but
I
just
bet. I was like, oh,
didn't know what to say. Like that happened when he sprinkled holy water on him.
right on the part of the baptism where yeah,
Right, and
okay.
then light shot out of the eyes, red light. And and when this person told me that, a person said the uncle practiced sorcery and was a Satanist, and so there was some of this going on in the family. And when the
You know
person was
what? Isn't it
born,
oxymoronic? I'm going to interrupt you here.
hmm
You've got a practicing Satanist, but he baptized the baby in any Catholic or anything. I
uh-huh.
hope he wasn't the Godfather. Anyway, keep going with your story.
Well, yeah. So this person had always had these things happen in the past, supernatural abilities, seeing spirits, things like that, and which I was always just thought was fascinating. But then there was this
Hmm.
sort of demonic side, a question mark, like
Right.
light, red light isn't supposed to shoot out of your eyes when you're getting baptized,
Never, as a matter of
And
fact, really, if you think about it.
really, really, and so I'm pondering this, and the person said that they had abilities and like impervious to getting hurt in some cases, and wondered if
Okay.
this was like a supernatural ability from something of the dark side.
Okay.
And that's when I said, you know what? If it is, then I think that we fooled the devil into healing you. Praise God. And when I said that, that was the trigger. That
Really?
pissed something off so bad that this person's voice dropped like 3 octaves and started talking to me like, damn you to hell, and started cursing me out, right? And it wasn't this person anymore. The nice
Okay.
person that was just talking to me
Mm-hmm.
was gone, and this thing was cussing me out
Okay.
and cursing me, and like just weird. So I said, in the name of Jesus, I cast you out. And I
Okay.
heard a scream, phone dropped. A few minutes later, the person picked up the phone, had amnesia, didn't know who I was. Uh,
Oh.
this was like a 3 month period of on and off amnesia that was bizarre.
Okay.
Uh, and the person worked out through these things, but um, it's kind of where I got some of my theories about psychology and maybe what getting possessed by a spirit, whether it be a demon or a deceased human,
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
well, what effect must that have on the human brain? Because even after the spirit is cast out, the brain has still got like some segmentation in it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's probably where you get multiple personality disorder. It could
Yeah.
come from that. It's a theory. I'm
Sure.
not going to go and say that just because somebody has some of these psychological issues that they were possessed. But
No.
the way the Bible describes possession is very much clinical in a way. It's something that happens. It's a sickness that happens, just like any sickness. Jesus casted out demons, and he
Mm-hmm.
also did that hand in hand with healing. They were one and the same in that day. Uh,
And the thing is, multiple
Psychological,
personality disorder is not something like a disease of the brain that just happens. Like most everybody that displays that had severe trauma, usually in
hmm
childhood.
exactly.
Physical, sexual, mental, you name it, slash slash slash, systemic over usually a length of period of time, and then of course these personalities that they develop. Supposedly, this is how they cope. In other
hmm
words, stay sane and that's why they say, some of the some become like the guardian. They have these different traits, and
Right.
but then you hear other versions um, where is it? Are these personalities? Are we really talking the same person, or are we talking an
Something else.
attachment? And people don't realize that you can get an attachment from a non-human, whether it's demonic or extraterrestrial, but you can
Yep.
also get an attachment from a discarnate human spirit.
I think
Okay.
so. So that's where I diverge from a lot of Christians, because a lot of Christians are like, no, there's
Oh,
heaven and there's hell. And I'm like,
no,
okay,
no,
explain to me what heaven and hell
no.
are. That's why I have a whole section of that book describing realms of existence and how they overlap, and they're not just as clear cut and dry, black and white as a lot of people think they are.
Well,
Hell
a
is like
lot
right in our midst sometimes.
a lot of people believe that the entryway for a lot of, and I'm not going to use the word possession because that's like a really loaded word. I'm going to use
Right.
the word
With a
attachment
lot of
or influence or
stigma.
whatever. Yeah. A lot of people think that the entry point, one of them, is through trauma. Physical
Hmm.
trauma, like what you said when he took that fall down the stairs.
Hmm.
Sometimes that will leave an opening and you would think, well, how can that happen? Okay. But I mean, I'm not going to get into it now as far as how that happens. But
Yeah,
sometimes the trauma doesn't have to be like a,
it
abuse
happens.
scenario. But
And
yes,
yeah,
sometimes that will happen, especially if the person goes unconscious. That can
yeah. And
happen.
that's the thing about the Bible, is it just sort of breezes over this stuff and
Hmm.
doesn't explain. I am yet to find the passage of scripture that tells you exactly how a demon possesses a human, other than
Right.
if you live a sinful lifestyle to such an extent that you're just like over the top, it opens doors. But how?
Right.
And
Right.
demons, like you ask people, how is a demon even here? How is it able to get? Aren't they trapped in hell? Apparently not. Not all of them
Right.
anyway. And the thing is, they'll say, no, you can't be possessed by a human. I'm like, okay, riddle me this, Batman. If a demon can come around and possess people, why would a human who is less evil than a demon have more restrictions than a demon? Does that make
Right.
any sense? And
Exactly.
however the demons are doing it, human spirits can probably do it too. And I
Right.
think that the whole phenomenon of um, reincarnation, people
Hmm.
having memories of other lives and stuff,
Right.
it's probably possession.
Sure. Well,
I mean,
if and I'll give you a for instance. Let's use the alcoholic scenario. You know how they say sometimes, alcoholics, they, let's say they try to go sober and they can't and they really want to. And we're talking an addiction. And nobody's saying this is an easy thing to do.
right.
And then there's some of them that no matter how much they try, this like they can't. One of the theories is that basically they have an attachment of a deceased alcoholic because that like attracts like kind of thing,
Yeah. Hmm.
universal law. That basically what they have is an attachment of a once human alcoholic, but he doesn't have a human body to experience the drink. So they say a lot of times, when the people they have these blackouts or these lose touch with reality is basically when that attachment slips in and experiences the alcohol moment, I guess. I don't know what's the
Hmm.
tipping point.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, that attachment is also what makes it difficult or impossible sometimes for that person to
Yeah.
stay sober, go sober, stay sober, whatever. This is a theory, and
Yeah.
that, but
And another theory here's in the same vein. Did
hmm,
studies on thought forms and energy.
yes, tulpa,
The phenomenon known as psychometry. You could
yes,
touch an object and say, okay, the killer was wearing this. The
hmm,
person got their throat slashed. And they tell the
right,
police these things. How do they know that? How did that information get into this object?
okay,
So it could be that our atmosphere and objects and atoms have information just thrown into them. When
right,
something traumatic happens, it's just like a
sure,
person will explode with all of this energy, and it impregnates into the atmosphere. So this is what creates haunting activity, but it can also infuse into objects that a person has a connection with. Uh, then you get people that are like sensitive that tap into that energy, and they're like reading it like a book.
hmm,
And this is another explanation of what ghosts could be and stuff. Let's say you're walking along and you're one of these sensitive people, you don't even know it, and you pick up something and suddenly you see a ghost. maybe what you're seeing is a recording that's being played through your visual cortex in your brain because your body picked up on this recording and you're playing a
Mm-hmm.
recording in this object.
Right.
And that's how they get this whole psychometry thing. That's where it comes from. But maybe it even applies to like atmospheric conditions, you
Sure.
know? And the same thing could happen where a person, if that energy has that kind of power, maybe even not the spirit, but the energy itself can attach to a person. So it's not necessarily a sentient person. It's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily even a
Right.
demon or a ghost. It's energy. And somebody went to a bad place and they got it stuck all over them, or they picked up an object and they
Yes.
hung on to it, or they're wearing somebody's shirt or something
Yeah.
like that. And these things start happening and they're not putting two and two together. That and it could be an endless variety of combinations, but a
Yeah.
person that's stuck in an addiction could do something like, every time I wear this shirt, I have this overwhelming urge to go smoke a cigarette, and I don't know why.
Yes.
But would they ever put those two things together? No. But that reality is there. I see
Sure.
that reality around us, and that we're affected by energy everywhere. And it's
Absolutely.
all kinds of energy, not just traumatic things, but
Mm-hmm.
it could be good things too.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing to contemplate, because a lot of the things that we see and we can explain one way with psychology or whatever, there's other ways to explain it too. And on the flip side, there's other ways to treat that are just as effective. So you have, say, like this shaman in an Indian village who says, if you do XYZ, guess what? It might actually work, because he's
Mm-hmm.
seen these things and he's kind of put two and two together on some of these odd things. But we over here in Western society would look at that and go, that's superstition. Totally throw it all out the window. But maybe there's a grain of truth there.
Right.
Not to endorse shamanism,
Right, right. And
but
and a lot of it I think also has to do with a belief system.
mm-hmm,
Belief in a person, the power of the mind. It's very powerful. In other words, um, if that person believes, let's say, in that system, whatever it is,
mm-hmm,
and that this person has the ability to heal or cure, especially if the disease or the illness is psychosomatic,
mm-hmm,
the same way
particularly,
exactly. If they
mm-hmm,
believe that the person that curing them or doing whatever they are, ritual ceremony or whatever, that's sometimes, I'm not going to say all the time because there's another part where there is actual cures.
right,
Um,
yeah,
but at the same time that where they're cured, but it's
mm-hmm,
basically because it wasn't real to begin with, even though they displayed all the symptoms. But the mind is very powerful as far as how it affects our bodies. Our
yeah,
body will react. Um,
yeah. And the cool thing is, I kind of like looking at both of those things. I'll look at the
sure.
Bible and I see faith, and I understand faith through a certain context, from a spiritual context. But but there's another way to understand that. You could look
Yes.
over here on the scientific realm and understand that there's been experiments, thought experiments, that there's been experiments on how consciousness is integrated into our reality.
Mm-hmm.
How Tibetan monks can focus on water and actually crystallize components of it and affect the water, the molecular structure
Right.
of water. So if your consciousness, there's also, you can't determine the speed and position of an electron, um, quantum entanglement, things like that, right?
Right.
Uh, there have been experiments with your consciousness and how your consciousness and your perception is integrated with reality. We don't
Sure.
quite fully understand it yet, but our reality is integrated with the way we think and how we perceive
Absolutely.
it. And mostly we think that we're just recipients of our reality.
Oh no, we
Things
put it
happen
out.
around us, and we just have to respond to what's happening to us. But faith is the Bible telling us you actually have the ability to reverse that. You have the ability, not even physically, but spiritually, with your thinking, your perception, you can alter what's going on around you to a certain extent. I know there's limitations to it, but I mean, according to Jesus, there are far fewer limitations to faith than we think.
Sure.
And the question is, how do you understand that? How do you really grasp that, and then harness it the way that he did? Um,
Well, I think also sometimes people are very hung up on being able to quantify something. In other words, if I can't measure it,
A
if I can't
formula.
prove it, film it, record it, reproduce it, model it, then it can't exist. Or like you said, either if from a religious point of view, maybe you're going into the dark zone, like, oh, I shouldn't go there.
Hmm.
Or if you're on the scientific part, it's like, if I can't do any of the above, then forget it. There's no reality. If I can't reproduce it,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Well, then
doesn't
it's
matter.
worthless,
Exactly,
and
it's
and I don't
worthless.
need to look into it anymore. So
Exactly.
uh,
Exactly. That it and it. I mean, it could go in so many directions. I'm going to ask you one last question, John, and I wanted to see
mhm.
what your opinion is on this.
Okay.
Since we were talking about portals and interdimensional, interdimensional, all that groovy stuff, I'm sure you've heard of all these people that have disappeared in these national parks under very unusual circumstances.
Here in
Okay.
California, yeah, there were a couple that happened
Right. Well,
near where I go camping.
Yosemite, from what I understand, is like a hotspot.
Yeah,
Do you think? I mean, I've heard the Bigfoot, extraterrestrial, or do you think that's possibly possible? Even though I'm that we're talking some type of either an interdimensional pocket or slip
there
or
are
hole or.
gateways. Oh yeah, there are gateways. I've seen shows about it. Like for some reason, the closet tends to be a place in a house in lots of
Oh
houses.
my God! Yes,
What's going on
you're
with that?
right.
But there are like interdimensional pockets that tend to crop up in closets for some reason. There's
Yeah,
that's a book. That's got to be a book.
it is. Let me tell
Another
you something. You're
oddity.
absolutely right.
I knew this guy that was in deliverance ministry for 17 years, and the stories that he had were phenomenal. I mean, resurrections from the dead. I mean, just he resurrected a bird from the dead. I
Wow.
mean, just bizarre things. Seen people teleport or not teleport.
Levitate?
Demonstrate telekinesis just to
Oh,
freak him out. And he was like totally unfazed, you know. Said,
okay.
no, no, I got power, I got power, and would throw the pager on the ground and hold out his hand, and the pager floated up, landed in his hand, and he's like, so? What does that do? So what? You got a parlor trick. Your demon is controlling you. Doesn't that concern you? So this
Uh,
guy had all these stories, but he told me about portals, and he said that there's a
mm-hmm.
portal over here, not too far out on Highway 41, that he'd
Okay.
actually seen it. He's able to see some of these things,
Okay.
and yeah, it's just amazing the stories that he has and stuff, and then other stories that I've heard where there are gateways,
Okay.
like a ghost, for example. Here's another odd one. Ghosts tend to use doors.
Yeah.
Why don't they just go through the wall?
Right.
But they don't. And my theory is they probably have a problem with electricity. It might bug them.
Yeah, sure.
So, I've always wondered, like, what would happen if you brought one of those zapper things to a house that was haunted, those little racket things that are electricity,
Mm-hmm.
and use that, going around there like, come on, ghost,
Yeah.
wherever the hell you are, I'll jack you up. So,
You know
yeah,
what?
it's
There's
odd
a book
thing.
written by a psychiatrist. His name was Wickland, and he wrote a book called
Hmm.
30 Years Among the Dead. He was a well-known psychiatrist trained in Chicago. Bottom line, around the 1910s, 1920s, he would do. They're not exorcism; it's detaching attachments. His wife acted as a medium.
Hmm.
Guess what he would use to detach them or to get them out to talk? A minor electrical shock to the person.
Okay, so my theory was right. I had
Yes,
that theory all along, and I just
yes,
kind of
yes,
wanting to test it, but
yes,
that's
and
interesting, and it doesn't surprise me.
yes. And he says the first time that he had an experience was he was a medical student and he was in the back then he was practicing his anatomy on a cadaver
Hmm.
and he heard some crackling, and this was his first experience with. He was a medical student. He was totally science,
Yeah.
and that was his first experience with basically a ghost. And later on, and he was and his field of study was psychiatry, but yeah, he would dislodge it, and he gave it with that a minor electrical shock. We're not talking electrotherapy or nothing like that for people that are
Hmm.
thinking no, 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 no. Uh, and when you mentioned that, I was like, oh, I've heard this before.
Yes, yes, yeah.
So it's a fascinating. Let me ask you, Art, since you've written so many books, do you have any in the works right now?
Right now, I'm kind of on pause just because of the marketing aspect of it. I spent myself into oblivion, and I haven't been selling anything.
Mm-hmm.
I've been giving them away. I was giving them away for like, I don't know, 15 years, just
Wow.
free downloads. But
Yes.
you can only afford to do that for so long,
Sure.
and actually keep writing and supporting keeping the website up and running and stuff like that. So
Yes.
um, now I have my website set up that if anybody wants a book for free, I will
Mm-hmm.
give them a book for free if they agree to give me a review on Amazon.
That's a great
So
idea.
that's a deal for anybody that wants to go to my website, johnmyler.com. Any book, pick any book you're curious about. I'll email it to you on our system, and
Mm-hmm.
you can give me a free review. Um, and I have ideas on several books, but uh, I recently retired. Now I'm full time at Pacific Gas and Electric cybersecurity. It's
Mm-hmm.
really sucking up a lot of my time.
Sure.
But I always have two or three books in my head, and
Sure.
I do try to. What I've been doing is actually writing articles and posting them on my website, and then
That's
I'll
great.
make my rounds. And there's a children's book too that I want to make a video series on. Uh,
Okay.
the Gathering. This is about
Okay.
the animal's journey to Noah's Ark.
That's a kid's book?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Well, lots of pictures.
Okay.
So it's actually got a picture for every chapter, and there's 52
Okay.
chapters,
Okay.
and it's part for kids, part for adults. Every chapter has a commentary so that
Mm-hmm.
like youth pastors or parents can read about how the story connects to the Bible
Okay.
in many
Okay.
different ways. But I was going to do a 52 videos to attach to each of the chapters, but you really don't need the videos. The commentary does it. There's commentary notes that cover it. So
Oh,
that's a
wow.
project, kind of a comprehensive project, and
Yes. Yes. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, but I was going to tell you, I could tell you're a writer at heart, among other things. So,
yeah,
yeah, and
not a marketer, but a writer. So
yes, that most writers aren't marketers, by the way.
yeah,
Yeah, it's but that thing that you were saying, yeah, I might not be writing, but I'm percolating ideas in my head.
hmm
I could
yeah.
tell. Anyway, John, I hope you come back because I would love to talk to you because we could talk about a lot of stuff. But either way, I want to wish you the best of luck in all your projects coming up.
All right. Thank you very much, and thank
It
you for
has
letting
been
me do my show.
fascinating to speak to you.
All right. Yeah, this was a great interview. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Take care.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Wow. Wasn't he a great guest? God. You have to admit. You have to admit. It's Marlene. You say the same thing about all your guests. Of course, because that's why I invited them to be my guests. Because I think that God, this was a lot of the stuff that he talked about. It's like, wow, I could talk to you about this and this and that and that, and I would love for him to say talk about some of the stories, things that he's experienced. Like he said, after he's had that moment when he was what 20, 21 or whatever. Um, and I believe him when he says because I know that. How can I say it? Yeah, a lot of people will say, well, if you go out, you know, looking for ghosts or whatever, whatever it is, Bigfoot. Well, but there's times, which by the way, these are the experiences that I think are the best ones when you're not looking for it, and somehow once you put your foot in that field, the experiences come to you. All right, the experiences come to you, and sometimes they're so subtle that if you're not paying attention, you don't get it. And sometimes you recognize an unusual thing later on when you're like, wait a minute. Um, but yeah, it's not, a lot of people think, oh, when you go into the paranormal, whatever the case might be, it's always got to be full blown. I saw an apparition, I saw whatever, something monumental, something fell off the shelf or, was thrown across. No, 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 no. Okay. Once you're in that, and let's say you're not on a case, you're just doing your thing, whatever it might be, anywhere, by the way, a lot of things happen that it's almost like they have been in your presence. And I'm sure there's stuff that's happened around me that I never even caught it. I'm sure it was just because, we're, especially nowadays, that everybody's multitasking I think we're an automatic pilot with multitasking. Whether we're at work or, get home and whatever. And a lot of things just, our peripheral vision when it comes to stuff like that, it narrows because when you're like caught up like on a to-do list. But yeah, I would love to ask him what are his experiences, because a lot of things do happen once you put your foot in that field. However, and I want to qualify that statement because I've said it before, once you're in this, doing this, whether it's paranormal research, whatever, well, I don't care, whatever you want to call it, you always have to draw a very strict boundary between your personal life or your families and that type of work. Okay? You do. And in a physical sense. Because, like I said, I've seen people that get absorbed by this type of work, and it basically swallows them up because they're like, and then they ignore the things in their lives, and I will say that I've seen occasion where basically the work opens a dark doorway into their lives because they just have never put down that boundary. All right, with whatever their research is or the cases they're doing or whatever the case might be. All right. It's almost like beguiles you into that total 24/7 kind of like, and then before you know it, that's when dark, strange things start happening. But yeah, I let me tell you, I think I got to bring him back. I got a lot of things I would like to ask him about, you know. Um, because that's usually and by the way, one thing that he pointed out, which I think is great, and I've mentioned it before, you can be analytical, science-based, whatever you want to call it, you know, and then also have another part of your brain or your thinking process or your belief system that is not that delineated, that there's that softness on the edges which allows, if not acceptance, at least leaving the door open to say, okay, I might not understand that, or that sounds crazy from the get-go, but let me explore exactly what that's about, because maybe there's more to it than just no. In other words, those two things can exist within one person. That's the way it is with me. All right, I can be very analytical, super analytical. All right, but there's another part of me which is not that way, and which is the one that allows me, even when I hear things or see things at the first, I'm like, oh, forget this. What a bunch of, and then I'll catch myself after I do that initial explosion of, forget it. This is, and then I'll stop a minute. And that's one thing you learn about yourself, and then I'll start thinking about it. And depending on how much I know, and then one of two things: either I find out more, or say, okay, you know what? This sounds implausible, improbable, impossible. But what if there is something to it? I'm not going to discount it just because I don't understand it at the moment. All right. The flip side of that is that you don't take everything hook, line, and sinker and like, there's times that you have every right that you should question it, examine it. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with putting a concept, a belief, an event, something that you saw on the back burner and say, okay, I'm going to put you there for a bit because I need to find out more about this. You know, because either it's not what it seems, and by this I mean things, even people. I need to find out more about this. Let me do some research on this. I call that the R word, research. So what I'm saying is we should both be capable of both things. All right. And I think that we're like I was saying, if you're too rigid because it makes you feel secure or in control, that rigidity costs you. It costs you. The flip side of it is that you could, these rigid people that things are this way and the world is this way and this is what's true and that's what's not true and this is because if not I can't function because I need to know that that's it, whether it's there's no such thing as extraterrestrials or Bigfoot or ghosts or whatever. Whatever your concept of the reality is that rigidity demands so that you think that this is how you can function, okay, you lose out because the richness of life as a human being is to allow some flexibility where you hear, see things, and you analyze it or think about it. Remember, always at the end, you can reject it and say, you know what? Even if it's true, but that's not for me. I don't know, it doesn't make me feel right. I don't like it. Nothing nobody's ever saying. Or you say, you know what? Whether it's an idea, God, whatever. But anyway, we're better for it, or at least have the knowledge of it. And say, yeah, I've heard of that. And I know that this is what it entails. And I think it's a BS, or yeah, it's okay, but not for me, not my bag, baby. Or it's like, yeah, I'm totally on board with that theory, whatever it is, belief system, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Anyway, guys, don't forget sign up for my newsletters. You're gonna get maybe once a week one of my articles off Substack, and I also send out some of my podcast versions of the shows, usually ahead of time before they come out on YouTube or remember I'm on BitChute, I'm on Steemit, I'm on the you name it. I'm everywhere. I'm on Rumble. I'm on all the video podcast versions and then podcast versions. So also, wherever you find me, you could just subscribe and you get notified. You could find me the show on Roku via Rumble. If you can download the Rumble and I'm on there as MP Pellicer. All right. I'm also launched a paranormal news edition version, and I've spoken about this in earlier shows. It's called Eerie News, and you type in eerie.news, no .com, eerie.news, and it'll take you to that page. I do an article version of it, and then I do at least every other day until I get a little bit more flexible on this. At least every other day, I put out a video version of the paranormal news as eerie.news. All right, so, and again, guys, I've got great guests coming on, new guests, old guests, coming on talking about different things, new concepts. Again, remember, and this is for those people, because I watched regular news. When I mean regular news, there's a lot of stuff going on in our world. Okay. Believe me, I am not the type of person that buries their head in the sand. I am not. I am not. And when I bring some of the stuff, these shows and these topics and these authors or people that I'm interviewing, or if I do the podcast series that I have, Nightshade Diary or Supernatural Storytime, believe me, I enjoy it, and that's my bag, baby. But I'm hoping that for some of my audience, this is just a little time that you could like withdraw from the reality of what's going on in our world, which sometimes is pretty scary and threatening. And well, how can I say it? For us people, for us humans that we like our regular stuff, it seems that we just don't know what's around the corner, and that can cause a lot of anxiety and worry. And so I'm hoping that if you come and you listen to some of my stuff, even if it's for an hour, half an hour, whatever the case might be, it's like I'm going to check out for a little bit and listen to Marlene and her crazy stories and her interviews and whatever the case might be. And some of the stuff which I think is what a bunch of, or man, that's really interesting. Whatever the case, that at least you can suspend that, how can I say it? Because there's some people that really follow the news and trends and everything closely, and there's others that don't, but forget it. With some of the stuff that's going on, there's no escaping it, okay? I don't care how detached you are, it's there. That, this is going to ease your mind for just a little bit. It's going to help you not to telescope on problems so that all of a sudden it's like things become out of proportion in your head, all right? So I hope you come back every week. Spend some time with me. We hear some crazy stuff. And of course, like always, I think you're all wonderful. Take care. See you next week.